brought to you by Curious Marineland. So let's take a look at the answers to some classwork today. So today we got a handout called Using Punnett Squares, and there were 4 Punnett squares. Now in today's class we didn't do this problem. I'll do another video on incomplete dominant problems. So these are 3 standard choices, and then on the back there were 3 more and some practice, and then we got to this and it's like, alright, what do we do? So take a moment and check out the answer key. And you'll notice this one is, those are supposed to be big C's. So a homozygous dominant times a homozygous recessive produces all dominants, and the dominant heterozygous genotypes and all dominants. A homozygous recessive again times a heterozygous in this case will produce 50% or 2 to 2, 2 heterozygous genotypes and 2 homozygous. Now I've always stated to my students in the problem they have to write these letters. If they wrote heterozygous, I'm not going to count because I don't want the definition. I want the specific example from the word problem. And this would be too short, too long. And then this one right here is probably the traditional. This is the traditional 1-to-1 ratio, 3-to-1. A lot of students are familiar with that. If you'll see, these 3 are right there, and then this one is right there and there. The phenotypes and the genotypes should confirm each other. And again, I expect students to say 3 black, 3 red, not 3 heterozygous or 1 heterozygous, 2 heterozygous. If it's phenotype, say the trait. If it's genotype, say the letter combination. So on the back, here's 3 more combinations. And if you guys are having a little difficulty here, let me just show you. I'm going to switch over here and show you the back from this handout. Now look at the results here. On my quiz, a lot of times I'm going to put a whole background scenario, like you see, we'll identify the dominant and the recessive, and then give you some traits. So one trait a lot of students don't see is they see heterozygous times homozygous. They see homozygous times homozygous. And then there's hetero-hetero, but this is homozygous dominant times homozygous heterozygous. So genotypically they're different, but phenotypically they're the same. Now she said, when I had a student write this, she wrote 2 black, 2 black. This really should say 4 total black. You can't look at a homozygous dominant or a heterozygous that's dominant and tell the difference. So really it should have said 4 black here. So that's the problems. That's what we have here. Okay. Now take a look at these alligators. Actually, if I can go back, see this problem right here? I said do a test cross. So let's figure out how to do a test cross. So can you tell if this long-tailed dragon is dominant? Yes, we've identified it. But can you tell if it's homozygous or heterozygous? No. So you have to do a test cross. What is a test cross? A test cross is crossing the unknown genotype, meaning a dominant phenotype, with the known recessive. So let's look at the results here. Pause the video and take a look at the results here. Notice I've color coded. So when you cross a dominant times a recessive and it produces all dominants, it tells you that that dominant is homozygous. When you cross a dominant times a recessive and you get recessive, it tells you that that recessive is that dominant is carrying a recessive. So what about this scenario? In this class, during class, I gave this scenario, and I only gave one Punnett square, so I'm telling the students they should be able to figure it out. So if you look and see this hint, the first mistake students make is they see short and they think that's recessive. They say, oh, this is the dominant one. Well, no. Different traits, different organisms. Don't confuse them. Take everything as a starting point. Rule 1, identify the alleles. Identify the alleles. Then know what you're crossing. So you're crossing a recessive times a dominant, but here's a hint. This dominant had a mother with long ears. It means it had a mother with a recessive trait. So take a look at the solution. Let's go over here. Pause and take a second. So what it is, I underlined, here's the genotype of the one donkey, here's the genotype of the other. Originally in class, I'll put a question mark, and then we'll talk about what it is. And we say there's only one Punnett square, which means you should know that that E, big E, the other E has to be a recessive, and it is. Here's the mother, here's genotype. It had a mother with a long ears. All right, so this is the solution to the other one, so if you want to pause the video. And now, really quickly, I want to give you some good practice with all these principles with a word problem. So here's a word problem that was given in class. And the students work on the rest of it for homework. Now, what do you have to do? You've got to be able to mark this up. You've got to be able to recognize the traits here. All right, polled is dominant. It's given to you right there. Horned is recessive. Now, in the past, I've had students use P's, but we're going to go ahead and use a capital H for the dominant trait and a lowercase h for the recessive. And so what do you have to do? You got to go through and mark this up and figure this out. You got to figure out the genotypes and the phenotypes. So right off the bat, if you stopped at Cal A, you wouldn't have much information. Remember, horned is recessive. So here's the scenario. Look at, you know you have a bull, and I'm going to put the bull here, here, here. This is Cal A, Cal B, Cal C. Just to save a little time, I'm going to bring up this problem and go back and forth. So here's the problem. Cal A is horned. Here she is horned. Cal B is horned as well, meaning recessive. No horns is dominant. So notice the question mark. I have a question mark because we don't know until we cross them. Can you look at a dominant and know its phenotype? Know its genotype? No. Notice Cal C, I put a question mark there because it's dominant times a dominant. So after the first child, let's fill this in. The first child is a dominant trait, so we still don't know anything. You notice I haven't filled out this part of the Punnett square yet. Now let's look at what happens at the result of this. According to the problem, Cal B produced a horned calf. Well, horned is recessive. So when a dominant and a recessive produce a recessive, that tells you the dominant is carrying a recessive. Notice the next slide is going to actually fill in this and this, not this part yet. So now we know the genotype of the bull. It's heterozygous because a dominant times a recessive produces a recessive. Here it is. The last thing is, now when we do test cross, we cross the unknown phenotype with a known recessive, a known recessive. So we've done a test cross really for these two. Remember, crossing with an unknown, crossing an unknown genotype, meaning a dominant phenotype, with a known recessive. So we're here. Now, last thing is we'll look at the results. And Cal C produced a horned calf. Horned is recessive. So here's the rest of this filled out. And this is written differently, but if you look, you can see how we can circle which one of these. It could have been either one of these. It could have been either one of these. But for the last cow, it can only produce this calf that is recessive. This is your standard 1-2-1 ratio. These three are all dominant in this. Now remember, a Punnett square is not they have 4 children. This is the probability for every 1 child. So this recessive trait, that recessive cow here, had a 25% chance. Each box represents 25%, or 1 out of 4. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Brought to you by Curious Moranland. Thanks for watching, and we're going to stop now.